Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. So what makes a great team? Are there simple answers to that question? Yes and no. Building a great team requires a strong culture. But what does that even mean? How do I know whether my company has a strong or a weak culture? What would make the culture better? And while we're talking about this, how do values fit into this equation? We're going to cover all of this on today's episode. Today's guest is Greg Lingelbach from TEC Canada. Greg consults and works with entrepreneurs every day of the week. Let's get to the conversation about culture, core values, and high-performing teams. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Shaun. It's great to be here with you.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about building a team, and really, with connected to that is culture. Why do you think those two words, team and culture, are just so linked and tied together? Like, can you have one without the other?
I don't think so. A team that doesn't have values to help the team prop up can't build a culture.
If they don't, they can maybe have I guess they could have a bad culture, which is really what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, totally. Like when I think of culture and teams and values, quite often companies, like in business, will put a team together. Everything's working. How's your culture? Well, I think it's good. What are your values? And there's a big blank stare. And then I know that they're going to struggle and struggle hard and long until they can set their values based on the leader's values. And then the team really congeals. And that's when you find out maybe you hired some of the wrong people because they don't have your values or the team's values. When you hire on values to start with, I mean, you've got 90% of the ways towards building a strong culture.
Mm. Is building a strong culture something that a lot of people aspire to, but it's like it feels so intangible. Like, how do you know if you have a strong culture or not?
That's a good question. When people ask me how do I know I got a good culture, I'll say, you have a good culture. The culture is what you tell your neighbor across your fence when you're out cutting the grass. And this is how I work. This is how I get treated at work. I'm seen, heard, and understood. They care about me. They got a plan for me. I can see myself moving forward. That's what you're telling your neighbor across the fence. In the farming world, I mean, what's a farm culture? That's when you got 15 combines or 10 combines in a field helping out a farmer that run across hard times or had a health issue. That's farm culture, which is similar to across the fence, but it's just a bigger fence.
Yeah. In some ways, this word culture is kind of like the word brand when we talk about marketing, right? It's elusive, but at the same time, it also can change. It's not something that's static. So just because you have a really good culture today, if you don't work at it and you're not paying attention, you can slide. Your culture can go to the negative side, I guess, of the pendulum if you're not constantly nurturing it, right?
Well, culture is like a marriage. right? Or a partnership of any sort. You have to work on it every day. You have to think about it. And managing by walking around improves culture. Communication is the biggest proponent, or the best thing you can do to foster your culture. When business owners run out of time to communicate to their employees, people will care how much you know when they know how much you care. That's when culture starts slipping. Or somebody steps on one of your values and nobody does anything about it, or steps on one of their values. That's when culture starts going sideways.
How do you deal with different members of the team potentially viewing the culture differently, or maybe rating it differently? If you're to ask, how would you rate our culture? 1 out of 10. I'm assuming that not everybody's going to say 8. You may have you may have some other numbers in there sprinkled around. That just seems kind of a bit of a reality. Should everybody view it with the same rating? Like, how do you deal with those different personalities, or just human nature? People are going to think differently about something.
Well, I don't think you can. If you had it on a scale of 1 to 10, you're going to get on any specific day, you're going to get a 3 and you're going to get a 10. What I suggest for people is to keep their culture alive again, back to values. Once a week or once every 2 weeks, whenever you get together with a larger group of people, maybe you've got standing meetings or something. Talk about one of your culture, one of your values, and how that is helping your culture. But you can't talk about someone specifically as a business owner. It's a peer thing, peer to peer. I've seen Peter, live up to our value with respect and trust. And let me tell you about that. That goes a lot farther than you, the owner, sharing something good about an individual. Eventually, those culture words, whatever you have, 3 or 4 of them or 5, become a normal thing. And you don't have to have them on the wall. You might have them on the wall for somebody coming into your office, but the people inside will know what your culture is. But you have to communicate it, talk about it, dig through the hard stuff. You can when you let people go, for example, they might have not lived part of your culture, and it's easy to explain that to a group of people.
Coming into this conversation, Greg, I thought lots about the connection of team and culture, but I can tell based on a lot of the things that you've said, values, the core values of the company, that is a critical component of this equation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what is culture if it's not your values? I mean, is culture, everyone, we got lots of food in the office. We have beer every Wednesday. I help people when I see them in need, get their teeth fixed, or maybe they need to go on a vacation, or they got some family issue. That builds to an internal culture, but it's really that's around your personal core values, the fact that you want to help that person. So it always comes back to core values.
So if you think about it from an equation standpoint, is it values plus team equal culture? Or do I have those words kind of mixed up in that equation?
Well, I mean, it's the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins would tell us, right? So if you've got the right people on the bus and they have your core values, you have the right culture. Like Gustavo, the Grodzinski, I think you've seen him. He works a lot with tech. Culture trumps everything. No matter what you do, if your culture sucks, people aren't going to be happy. Your sales are going to go not very fast. You're going to have a lot of retention issues. People stay, not always for money. They stay because of who they work for and what the company stands for, especially now with the generation that's coming up. Simon Sinek, for example, leaders eat last. Why some teams pull together and others don't. it's really to do with culture, and the biggest thing is leaders and the owner or the leader of the company.
Yeah, and you think about it from a sports perspective. We hear a lot about. We hear about the dressing room, the locker room, the clubhouse, right? And we hear about each of those teams. Probably has a culture. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and there's probably some sort of a direct correlation to the performance of that team on the playing surface. But we hear a lot about how not only the coach having to, it's not all the responsibility of the coach to hold those team members accountable to the values and the culture of the team, but it's the teammates to each other, and that I could see that really applying too in the work world, the business world, where it's not only leadership can flow a whole bunch of different directions when it comes to values and culture and the overarching team dynamic.
Yeah, like what I think you're saying here is in this clubhouse, in this culture, let's pick a sports team, and the coach can run around and assistant coaches, but it's really how the players treat each other. And if your culture, your values is based on, we're working together to a common goal, then there isn't all that stepping on each other to get to the top, right? I mean, you got lines of defense, you got lines of offense. If they're not working together, they don't know they need to work together. They're going to start fighting at the end of the game, right, with themselves. And that's what you see in business. I mean, people fight with themselves. I don't know if that happens in a clubhouse exactly, but it does happen in business if the teams aren't aligned with the values of, it's not all about winning, but I suppose in sports it is. I don't know.
We'll get back to the rest of my conversation with Greg Lingelbach of TEC Canada, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation, or finally getting that renovation done, or buying some new equipment. Or you want to be a little less reliant on the weather from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture account manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
Yeah, so Greg, if some of our listeners are like, okay, you know what? If I think back about this and I'm honest with myself, I've finished harvest. We've gone through the production cycle of with livestock, if you're on the livestock side of the equation.
Yeah.
Now, if I really think about it, you know what? I don't like the culture around here. If I really, really, really pay attention to it, and I think about what's important to me as the leader or the company as a whole, or you think back to the legacy of, because there's a lot of farm families, they've been around for, some over 100 years or more. There's a legacy there too, and that fits into the values. But I'm not happy with this. Okay, so if I make that decision or that identification, now what the heck do I do? How do I fix it?
That's not a good question. But we're talking about a family culture here, which is 90% of farms have a family culture. And you'd think a family would all have the same values, so it's not necessarily there. How many farm families actually sit down with their, let's say they got 2 sons and 2 daughters working in their industry with them in a huge farm? It's sitting down as you would in a company and talking again, communicating about the values that you have for each other and finding the scratch points, looking for the gaps and having conversation around it. That's the first place to start if you're unhappy with what's going on versus chasing somebody to have your values. In a family, it can be different and seek first to understand and then be understood. So that's what I would suggest is that first step of communicating, talking. What's wrong here?
Do you see a lot of time in your business experience working with business leaders that I gave the example, the farmer saying, I don't like what I'm seeing around here from a culture perspective. Does the leader sometimes misevaluate the culture rating? Okay, go. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're assuming something, right? You know what assume means. And so you're seeing a behavior that you don't like for some reason or isn't meeting the goals of the organization. So you assume that something is happening. And, our children are all different than us, for goodness sakes. Just like the employees are all different than us. And so if we don't really get down to the bottom of it and understand, we're making the wrong assumption. And, what can we agree on as a family that is our culture or our values? It's really starting from that. I mean, leaders do it in business all the time. Oh man, everything's so bad, or in the other side, everything is so good. I got a lovely culture, but they haven't asked anyone.
Yeah, I could really see that. Now, when we do, and you talked about do the people working in the business do they live up to the core values of the company? Where this gets really rough for some family farm businesses, no different than if it's a family hardware store.
Yeah.
You look across the table and you see your brother or your sister, and you're like, you're not living up to the values. Now, if it's an employee, you can make the decision on whether there needs to be an exit or not. That's right. Not as easy if it's your brother or sister. And so this is even more challenging in a family business environment.
Yeah, and when you're talking about values, that's really hard. If you don't have the same values in a family business, again, it's a communication between the two of you. And I hate to use the word compromise, but you might have to end at a compromise. Hopefully, they aren't dipoles where they're opposite ends. Holding each other accountable, it kind of comes to that in the family. Okay, we don't necessarily agree with what's going on, but we're going to move forward and we're going to, care for each other as a family. So the objective is to get the best harvest that we can, or in the cattle industry, get the best prices. We've raised the best we can. The intent is we're family and we're going to stick together. And so we don't always have to agree.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that, in the sports analogy that, it's not always about the winning in the business environment. If we think about all of this, though, a team working at its highest level of productivity is a team that, they don't always get along, but they respect each other. There's respectable friction at times going through the growing season, through, planting and seeding and harvest and all the different components of the cycle. I would think that you would give yourself a better chance at success, provided Mother Nature cooperates, but a better chance at success if you have that strong culture. Is right? Like how many dysfunctional teams ever win?
Not very many. I mean, I think you've studied it and you've talked about 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? By Patrick Lancioni. And, family farm is no different. Different people handle stress differently, and seeding time and it's raining, harvest time and it's raining, right? It builds stress inside the family, inside relationships. And how do you manage that stuff? It is, again, since we're all different, and some are stronger and some are introverts and some are extroverts and all over the map, is stopping and talking about it. When it pops up, just stop, I don't know, get off the tractor, get off the combine. And when you're having supper in the field, sitting on a blanket, eating pickles and sandwiches, talk about some of the stressors that are going through right now and how you're feeling. And then you'll get other people sharing their feelings. And, when we can share as a family, it works much better. It's much easier to do that as a family in those situations than it is in a business, because you're tied together, right?
Now, there's going to be some people listening to this saying, yeah, that sounds great, Greg, but farming is different. And so now I'm going to put you on the spot. You deal with a lot of different business leaders from a lot of different industries, and a lot of those are family businesses. Are the challenges all the same in this regard?
I believe they're all the same, totally. Whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're an engineering firm, it's still that same thing. Like, you're my sister, and I know that if our business goes in trouble, you'll put your house up to help this business go through. And you're not going to find too many employees doing that. So as a family farm, you even have more of a ability to stay together. But the root of all of the problems is all the same, no matter what business you're in. And you got to think of it as a business, and not just as a legacy that you're trying to leave and leave forward for your children or grandchildren.
Greg,
so I don't see any different. There's no difference.
Greg, thanks a lot for joining us here today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Such an important topic of building that ultimate high-performing team through things like core values and culture. Really appreciate the discussion and the insight.
It's been really fun on your show today, so thanks so much.
The culture of your team is a living, breathing thing that evolves and requires nurturing. As Greg Lingelbach says, it's like a marriage. You have to constantly work at it. Ensuring that you have people on your team that can live up to the core values is integral to achieving a high-performing team. These are things that leaders work on every day due to the fact complacency in this area can be very dangerous. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you have any feedback or comments, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com or call the Real Ag listener line at 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.